Hello, friends. How's it going? It's Michael Parker, and welcome back to Michael Parker Media. It is mid-July, but we are fast approaching the season of the witch. And in that spirit, today we're going to talk about magic with a K. Today's guest is a pioneer of weird, a connoisseur of cool. He's a curator of modern culture, a man after my own heart, a man whose work I have long admired, and I am really excited to be speaking with him today. Richard Metzger is the founder of Disinformation, the occult media and publishing company, Dangerous Minds website, which still exists. I've been on it a lot lately. Disinfo.com, or the DisinfoCon back in 2000, the Disinformation TV series for Channel 4 in the UK. He has a brand new project called Magick Show, and that's going to be the subject of what we discuss today. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, I'm glad you're here, and it was a fortuitous thing that happened that we got connected. I was driving the other day in Studio City, and I get a text from someone I hadn't spoken to in a long time, and it was our mutual friend, Lisa Derrick. And she said that she was working with you on this project, and I was like, can I help? And she said, well, would you like to talk to Richard? And I was like, I would love to. So I'm really glad that you're here. And my first question to you is, over the years that you've been doing this, and you're an OG of this. You've been doing this forever, longer than even than I have. Of all the subjects that you could do a new project about, why magic right now?
That is an interesting question. Let's look at it as phases of my career, right? That's what I'd like to think about it. There was disinformation, and that was based on a culture that I studied intently when I was in my 20s, right? And by the time that I was in my late 30s, I was no longer as interested in that. Mm-hmm. And so that's when I started an Outsider Arts blog, right? But now that that's sort of run its course as well, I'm starting to think about magic. But the reason that is, and I sort of go into this in an almost sort of comic booky way on the Kickstarter video, because I'm very serious, but I think we're living in a time period where there's a lot of really terrible, horrible, shitty people who are, they want to grab power and sort of lord over the rest of us, and it's really a horrible situation that's going on all over the world. I think England got it right in their recent election, and I think France barely got it right. But this idea of what's happening politically is it's disturbing, and I think that the alt-right type people, they're more in tune with magic than people more of a more progressive sort, I would say, in many ways. Or if nothing else, there needs to be a rallying of people who have as a baseline view of reality that magic works, that it's a real thing, And so that was part of it as well, is I'm just trying to find some kind of strange attractor, if you will, that would bring people together at a time when I think it needs to happen. And maybe it will coalesce into something else. You know what I mean? Like that's the thing. Who knows where this will go after this? I feel like right now, the plane is like sort of just taking off the tarmac, and it feels extremely exciting. And I find myself in contact with new people like yourself every day. I'm out there talking about this, every day. And I'm finding new allies who want to help this, and people that have liked my stuff, I guess, for a long time, and who are now saying, hey, it's really glad to have you, but, good to have you back, so that's been really gratifying also. But it's generally, and speaking, it's this idea that there needs to be an information war is being fought, right? Mm-hmm. There are people who are using the tools of technology and information and communication in a very dark way. And I think it's time for people who don't to fight back against that in simple terms, just to fight back against that.
It's interesting what you said earlier about these phases that we go through, because I'm similar to you, and I have done so many shows in the past. My entry point to this as a child was actually ufology. And I grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere, and I was way into science fiction. And from that jump off point, it then took me down many, many roads, and I've covered a lot of aspects of the paranormal, the occult, cryptozoology, conspiracies, religion, spirituality, the whole nine yards. And I have always been interested in aspects of this. And we both have an appreciation for rock and roll and art and punk rock. And I swear to God, it always seemed like no matter what group I was in, and by group, I don't mean musical group, but just group of information or interest, eventually I found myself ready to move on to the next thing.
Hmm.
I,
That's what happened to me.
Yeah, we find out as much as we can, and that doesn't mean that I'm done with any of it. It just means that I've kind of moved on to the next thing. And magic is interesting. When I met our mutual friend Lisa Derrick, I don't remember who introduced us, but I was trying to do a show about witches. And I had begun to delve into television a little bit. I thought, wow, witchcraft, modern witches would be a really interesting show to do it, and they're just real people like the rest of us. That's one of the things that you talk about in these 50 some odd interviews, is that these people who are witches or warlocks or occult practitioners, at the end of the day, they're still regular people.
They walk among us every day. Still regular people.
Yeah. Let's just start from the beginning so that people can have kind of a baseline. First of all, what is magic with a K?
Magic with a K would be an occult practice or belief system or philosophy system, if you want to look at it that way, that would be codified by somebody like Aleister Crowley. He's in fact the one who added the K to distinguish the art of the Magi from stage magic, pulling rabbits out of a hat. So that's the difference.
There seems to be this resurgence in the interest in the occult. And what would you attribute that to?
Well, I mean, I think there's always been an interest in the occult, whether it's witch burnings in Salem and that kind of interest, to the kind of interest that happened in America in this late 60s that was brought on by something like Rosemary's Baby, and then continued on into the 70s, with The Exorcist and something like that. So that was part of it. Then you have a reaction to that, against that, with the satanic panic of the 80s. And I think people start to realize that was bullshit. But I think today's interest, it's twofold. It's one, you have people who were raised on Harry Potter books.
Yep.
And you have people who are raised on the MCU. And they have access to any kind of occult wisdom. So it's not like they're going through some kind of library with these dusty stacks of occult grimoires that they can look at. It's all online. They can get it in their house. It's piped into their home like electricity or something. So that's what I think that's what I would attribute it to. And also it starts to make sense if you're young and you feel that you're living in a very chaotic situation, a very chaotic world, it's some way of just taking back a little bit of power, I think, also.
Another thing that struck me about this is that the rise or embrace of this type of material seems to run a similar path as the rise and the new embrace of psychedelics. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I think that to me, they're intertwined and never to be separated. I mean, I don't do a psychedelic to party. You know what I mean? I do a psychedelic to just pulverize me. I want to do the Terrence McKenna heroic dose of mushrooms.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna fuck around,
Yeah.
So I'm doing it for spiritual reasons. I want to hear the voice. You know what I mean? Like it's not partying. I'm not going to listen to music. I'm going to be in a room with no music and the lights turned off, laying on a bed and just going as deep into that space as I possibly can. But I think that psychedelics are a way. It was Timothy Leary basically who said, you can spend a life, trying to become a yogi or, meditating all this time and, to get to the place where this place of enlightenment where LSD could give you almost instantaneously, right? So in the sense that you could pop enlightenment into your mouth, it would be that easy. And I think that there is a lot of truth to that. But I also think that psychedelics are good when you're working magic also because they bring you into a different space.
I understand that. And I'm with you. I do not do it to party. I did 2 nights of ayahuasca back in January. And it was one of those things that, when I was young, I did more of those things. And I was in a music scene and we did those types of things with more frequency. Even then, we weren't doing it to party as much as to enlighten ourselves and open ourselves to inspiration, which I think is the reason that people look into esoteric knowledge of various religions or witchcraft or paganism or whatever it is today.
Well, I also think that when they take psychedelics, sometimes things start to happen. You start to have synchronicities start to happen. Weird things start to happen, and people once they get into that, that's an important stage in all of this is to get there. And I think that psychedelics can get you to that place where you're possibly or on the verge of or having some kind of communication with something else that is beyond you.
In regards to magic, you were quoting, maybe this was William Burroughs that you were quoting, but I loved this particular quote because it resonates with me. And that quote was, "The magician uses the tools of the time they live in."
That was spoken by Genesis Peerage,
Okay.
actually.
Psychic
But,
TV.
but the idea, like, I mean, we're using a magical tool right now. We're in two different cities and we're speaking. And so you get back to the Arthur C. Clarke definition of magic about any sufficiently developed technology is indistinguishable. Well, it is, I mean, that's the thing. If you were to ask me, like, okay, what's your stance on magic? What do you think it is, or how do you practice it, right? I think of it this way. Magic is a lot of things, but it's a mental martial art, first and foremost.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Would you agree with that? It's
Yes.
a mental martial art. You want to take control of yourself, but you also want to have some influence beyond your body without pushing something, but pushing energy out in that sense, right? But so like a motivational speaker like Tony Robbins is teaching people how to do magic. It's under a different name, and that's the thing. I don't think that magic has to have this kind of like dark patina around it. I mean, it's kind of fun sometimes when it does, and I sort of play with that myself sometimes, but it adds a little bit of drama and it adds a little bit of show business to it, but it doesn't have to have that. The magic is a neutral thing. It can be used for good or for evil, but it's a neutral thing, like a hammer. You can hammer in a nail or you can hammer in somebody's head. It's what you're using the tool for. But I largely see magic in sort of a secular way where I'm not making reference to spirits or anything spiritual, but willpower. Just simple willpower, wanting something to come into being, right? That's sort of where I'm at with it, by and large. And I see by being influenced by someone like Genesis or Kenneth Anger, who would teach that the art is in and of itself is a spell, right? And it's something to captivate people. But in his case, he was literally putting a ceremony on celluloid, But when I sort of grokked that idea, anything to me was a spell. So if I had a publishing company, it was a spell. You see what I'm saying? Disinformation was a spell. That's the way that I see things. This thing that I'm working on now, this magic show thing, is a large hyper sigil type of thing. And now it's amazing to me because I've got input from so many people. You know what I mean? Like it's been an amazing. I mean, it's only been like, I think today's day 6. No, today's day 7. It's been exactly 1 week. But it's been a whirlwind, I have to tell you. And it's been exhilarating and it's been satisfying. It's also been exhausting. I have a never-ending list of shit I have to do that just gets longer and longer and longer every day, because to do something like this, you have to just keep at it. You know what I mean? It's like and then after a point, you get critical mass and it goes out there on its own. That's what I'm trying to get to. But that, to me, this is all a magical act, and I'm using the tools of the time, which includes social media and having a podcast with you.
Over the years, I have known a handful of witches. I've known hundreds of people who practice various forms of the dark arts. And there have been times where I was going through an issue or something, and some of these people would say, "Well, Michael, here's what you do." And then they would tell me how to do a particular thing, ritual, spell, whatever you wish to call it. And I would do it, but part of me didn't feel 100% genuine. And the reason that I brought up the thing about the magician uses the tools of the time is I'm with you. I feel much more at home using electronic media or art or my own powers of manifestation and concentration, which is not to negate these other things that we're talking about, but just for me, that was where I felt more at home with it.
I agree with you. I'm not interested in anything liturgical when it comes to magic. I want to see results. I want to see something happen, And so if that means, working with a PR firm, that's what I mean by that. And you would say that, okay, that's a very secular definition of magic then, Richard, right? And it is. It doesn't take into account the other side of the coin in terms of the way my belief system, which was I believe that I live in a fully alive universe, an animist universe. You know what I mean? I feel like that there is communication that is possible with something that is beyond ourselves, that knows who we are and what we think, and are familiar with us. I mean, this concept in Crowley of the holy guardian angel, right? It's a very important part of the Crowley system, is this idea of attaining the knowledge and conversation of one's holy guardian angel. That to me is the whole game. It's the whole game. And in that idea expressed in a different way, he explains it as holy guardian angel because he wanted to come up with something that was so stupid that people would laugh at it, and then they would sort of like realize it after a while. But he named it, so it's so called because he felt that this was the dumbest name he could give it on purpose. Robert Anton Wilson, I think, called it the Earth Cosmic Coincidence Organization, something like that. Was Echo or Eco, but it was this point. So other people see it as synchronicity or coincidence, but when it speaks to them, when it has their name on it, when it's like a direct hit, that's something that when you're doing magic and when you're working your will correctly, the universe starts to send you signs. Period. That's the way that it is. And people who would argue with that have just never had it happen for them. That's what I would say. It's not like, okay, well, that's his opinion. No, it's my belief system on a baseline level, because I've tested the theory out scientifically that whatever this is beyond me. I'll give you some examples of it, right? When I was in my late 20s, I was doing a lot of DMT and a lot of mushrooms, right? And I was doing that at the time because things were going poorly for me in my career, and I wanted to just blow all the bad shit out of my brains and have some new ideas and just get fresh. So I went through this period of sort of like almost like a psychedelic retreat, where I was doing a lot of psychedelics on a daily basis. I was smoking DMT sometimes like 4 times a day. But after that, the synchronicities went wild. They went off the charts, right? And I'll give you a couple of them. So I was working in a hotel, right? And I started to the guy who I got the DMT from was calling it Dimitri. That was his code name for it, Dimitri. So I kept, every time I would run a credit card of somebody, there were so many people. It was like 5 or 6 people in a night that had the name Dimitri. What are the mathematical odds of that, right? So then I started to say, oh, and I keep getting a 23, right? It's somewhat silly to say this, but I kept getting 23s. Every time I'd run the card, I would get that as the code, from American Express or whatever. And I started to think, okay, something's fucking with me.
Yeah.
Something is literally fucking with me. And I said, okay, well, if this is a product not of my imagination, but of something that is outside of me, make right now a phenomenally good, just a coincidence happened that I could not explain away mathematically. And at that moment, a woman from Italy, who I had faxed earlier in the day to her office in Rome, presented me with her credit card with her name on it. And I went, holy shit. That happened. That happened to me. You know what I'm saying? So, and I've got hundreds and hundreds of stories that I could tell you that are just like that, where it's like a direct hit, where I'll pick up a book and sort of say, oh, I'm going to do some bibliomancy, open the book and put my finger on the page, and I open it and it's got my birthday under my finger. This stuff happens to me all the time. I could give you some more profound examples, but I don't want to bore everybody because it's like someone talking about their acid trip. But you have to sort of separate the noise of modern life from the message. You have to separate those two things. That's the key. I think that there's a woman named Sarah Lyons who she's an author. She's a witch, and she's an author of a book called Revolutionary Witchcraft, and she's a filmmaker. But she says that to her, the mark of a good mystic is somebody who can walk the line between recognizing the signs and knowing what is just the noise of the universe. And expressed a different way, I heard a guy on the Rune Soup podcast recently, one of the ones that they've done, and he wrote a book about synchronicity. And one of the things that he said was, don't get into numerology. Whatever you do, don't get into numerology. And because that's where madness lies. So this whole idea, when you read in occult books of crossing the abyss, it's how you get from, oh, all of this shit is happening. Am I schizophrenic? Well, no, I never felt that I was schizophrenic. How could I, after asking the universe, give me an unmistakable sign, that woman comes what are the odds of that? That you would have to say, how many billion people are there on Earth, and then how many traveled to New York that day? How many people? The law of large numbers would not explain that.
It's interesting that you mentioned numerology because I am steeped in conspiracy lore. I read these things and people like, well, Parker, why do you read that stuff? And it's like, well, why do you watch medical shows, man? It's like, I don't know. Why do you watch crime shows? It's like, it's interesting to me. And, but I've gone through it so far that I think that I have a pretty good filter these days. And in the numerology things, like sometimes people will take a particular event and then they'll start deducting it down to, well, you add this to that and divided by that on this phase of the moon. And, and you get all this exotic numerology connoting something that may not truly be there. So I don't want to pick on anybody who's into numerology. I'm just saying I try not to get too deeply into that. But one of the things you talk about the fact that when you went to organize this, you have 53 plus hours of interviews, correct? So now
correct.
you're in post. Now you're trying to put all that together. Is this going to be 3, 4, 5? How many episodes is this going to be upon completion?
This project was conceived as a television project, and all that implies. So I came up with, in the first episode, a 40-minute piece. So I could, and we have, an introduction with me standing in front of a library or something like that, and an ending and credits and all that. But it was essentially 40 minutes, and that's what the television industry requires. You have to give them that. If there are exceptions, but that's what they want in general, and that's what you need for foreign sales, et cetera. So this material forced into that stricture works, but it meant that I had to cut so much other stuff out. Right. And so when the sort of like rough cut of the pilot episode was finished, and we showed it to a few people, and it wasn't like they were like, oh, this sucks, we're not interested in it. They didn't even look at it. They didn't want to look at it. It was like, because I mean, that's, you live in LA and you know what the situation is in the industry right now. It's like, is there a celebrity attached to it? Come talk to us. If there's no celebrity attached to us, here's the hand. You know what I mean? And that's sort of what we thought, what we discovered. And it was sort of like, fuck, I don't want to go down that road. It's just depressing. It's not going to sell in this way. And I won't say that it was like Left for Dead, but it was like we didn't know where to turn. Right. So this is earlier this year.
Yep.
And then I was talking to a good friend of mine who's an art dealer and an art book publisher named Thomas Nagovin. And he's working on that Caligula, the recut of Caligula. That's his project. Right.
I didn't even know about it.
Oh yeah, there's a completely new version of Caligula that goes that hews to the screenplay that was written by Gore Vidal, and he put that together.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so I'm on the phone with him, and I mentioned we hadn't spoken probably in like 4 years. It was like pre-COVID. I saw him at a wedding, and we're talking, and I mentioned that I had this thing. He's like, "Wait, you have what? What? Wait, whoa." He's like, you shot how much? And you could do how many shows? And I was like, well, we shot this much. And I think I could get like 4 episodes out of it. Right. So that's what happened. And so then it becomes a Kickstarter thing. And then I started to think about it and having conversations with Douglas Rushkoff, who's the executive producer on it. And we started to realize that this material was telling us that it did not want to be cut into and smashed and compacted into this television format. It wanted to be something different, and to open it up more, to have people get a chance to to explain an entire anecdote, and instead of just being like, oh, here's 15 seconds, And I had so many like absolutely solid gold, beautiful moments where somebody is telling a story that is significant and that the audience would want to hear, but could I make TV out of it? No. So it ends up on the cutting room floor, So those things can come back in now. I feel less of it's a master class. That's the way I'm looking at it now. I see it less as something, I'm not aiming as much to entertain somebody per se. I don't want to bore them, but the information is more the important thing. Okay. It's the information. It's getting the information out there, and part of that is I certainly, people don't read books anymore. You know what I mean? It's like they get their magic from tips from TikTok and stuff like this, and so in this, with this sort of coalition, this Justice League of these 50 people, 51 people, someone watching this would look at what they're saying and think, that's not against science, or wait a minute. I thought this magic stuff was kind of like superstitious. It's not that. There's a scientific rigor to it, and it's why a lot of physicists are interested in the occult, But that's kind of the thing. So these pieces, that were, again, intended originally to be TV shows, the seams have been let out. They're longer, and they have more chance to explore the themes that were discussed. And because some of the people that I interviewed were experts in several different things, I would interview somebody for an hour. Everybody was against this red screen, right? You probably saw it in the trailer.
Yes, yes.
And so it was like an hour in, out, an hour, you're in for an hour. So it was like we were like chair jockeying, like somebody would arrive right as the last person was finishing up. So there was someone like Phil Baker, right? He is an author, and he's written books on William Burroughs. He's written books about Aleister Crowley, and he's written a book about Austin Spare, right? So if I have him in front of me, I'm going to interview him about all three subjects.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And so, and that's like, and so I have all that material. So he will be in 3 segments in that way. And so that's what I say. It's like I interviewed these people. They were going to be in front of me for an hour. I wanted to ask some of these people all the questions that I wanted to ask of these experts, and I got some amazing stuff, some really amazing stuff on tape.
Well, when I asked that question, I knew that you didn't mean that it was going to be a television show, although we would aspire to such a thing. I've tried to pitch shows on these types of subjects, and it's damned hard, man. So I've been there. I hear you. In today's modern television landscape, it's really difficult to sell a show. But of those 50 people, of which many of them are practicing, which is occult practitioners, what are some of the things that you heard that surprised you?
Nothing.
Really?
Nothing surprised me. No, I knew of these people already, and and even the people who were sort of like, as it were, being introduced to the audience, who were less familiar than someone like, Mitch Horowitz or somebody like that. But I knew, I've read all of his books, you know what I mean? So I knew what he was what flavor he was gonna bring. When I read Sarah Lyon's book about revolutionary witchcraft, I knew what flavor she would bring to it. You know what I mean? So it's this huge, human bouillabaisse of different things about magic that are, and then sort of sorted out, separated, and put into their own silos of content. So that's sort of the way that I look at it, in that sense.
Well, I'm going to ask you about chaos magic in a minute, but I want to tie off on one idea, which you brought up at the very beginning, which I've noticed. There's this idea that self-help, Napoleon Hill, et cetera, and I'm not knocking what they do. I've read those books myself. You're trying to better yourself. You're trying to understand, how do I speak to people with more influence? How do I believe in myself more? How do I make things happen? Well, the New Age movement happened in the 80s and the early 90s. And then we move into this era of life coaches and things. The Secret came out and all of that. And I'll be honest, I was kind of one of those guys like, please don't hit me with that stuff again. Because for a while, one of my big pet peeves was when somebody would say, everything happens for a reason. I'm like, no, it doesn't. Sometimes things just happen. So don't give away your agency in such a way. But it's just interesting that these types of self-help, motivational type things are in some ways magical incantations or self-motivating. I don't know what to call it.
You're psyching yourself up. That's what you want to do. You want to psych yourself up for something. They are indistinguishable. The Tony Robbins course that someone takes that gets them into this space where they can say, I'm going to go out and exercise every morning for an hour. And then when I get to work, I'm going to do this and that. I mean, that's magic, in the same way that a ceremonial magician, let's say in different times, would bring their accoutrements and put their cloak on, or do all this kind of stuff. You're psyching yourself up for something. You want something to happen, but it's also like self-hypnosis. Like, I mean, I certainly think that something like Ericksonian hypnosis at NLP are magic. The first book of neurolinguistic programming is called The Structure of Magic. It's a 2-volume set. It has Merlin on the front because they explicitly knew what they were doing. I think they were being cheeky, but it is that. You know what I mean? Like, you could look at a lot of NLP techniques and say, oh, well, that's identical to this. Or indeed, it's identical to Napoleon Hill. I'm big on Napoleon Hill. I think he was a weird guy, but a genius.
That's the first self-help book I ever read. And I think I was in my early 20s. I think I was going through a rough patch, and I'm like, what do I need to do? And I didn't even understand. I'd read a lot of weird stuff, but I had never delved into motivational type things. And when I read that, I was like, wow, this is remarkably sensible.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, the right book fell into your lap at the right time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't think I read that book until I was in my 30s, and when I looked at it, I thought, wow, I do everything right. You know what I mean? It was more
Yeah.
like I do these things naturally in the way that I sort of walk through the world. And I thought, okay, I mean, anything down to like when Napoleon Hill, his whole idea of like, if you have one other person. Like, in other words, if you have a business partner, you have the two of you now have the strength of three, that whole
Yes.
thing. And trying to find an affinity group of people that you want to work with and that where it's mutually advantageous. All of these kinds of things, he's talking about sort of creating systems in your life that for ease of moving through the world. And in his case, acquiring money. He's teaching you how to acquire money as well,
One of the
which
things,
is a magic thing.
hey man, I'm pro money. So,
Yeah.
I'm pro prosperity for everybody. So one of the things you talk about in one of the episodes that will be coming out is this idea of chaos magic, which frankly is one of the coolest terms ever, chaos magic.
Yes.
Um, and it is mentioned in the Marvel things. And maybe I'm a complete dork, but I didn't read any Harry Potter stuff ever. It's like by the time Harry Potter came out, I'm an adult. I'm like, been there, done that. But what is chaos magic?
Chaos magic is a form of magic that sort of begins in the late 70s in Yorkshire, in England. And there's a group of people who meet at a like sort of a bookstore cafe every week. My dog is there. And it's like a tea thing where people who are interested in magic can sit and discuss Crowley or whatever it is that these people stroking their beards would
Mhm.
would talk about, and that's where I guess Peter J. Carroll and Ray Sherwin and these people, they would go to the libraries in London and like Xerox or photocopy or copy down these really rare texts of like Austin Spare, and so they brought Austin Spare's theory of sigil magic and how that works of sort of making a symbol of what you want and then sort of charging it in some way or inflaming it and sending that energy out to the universe, right? Mentally doing that, creating something with your thought and with that action that had not existed before. And so it comes from that. It's Austin Spare is inarguably the godfather, if not the founder of chaos magic, but they incorporate from that. They incorporate from William Burroughs. They incorporate from shamanism, right? But largely what the idea is you want results. You don't want the robes. You don't want the magic wand. You don't want to say some prayer. You can do whatever you want. Your belief system can be mutable. You can pray to Mickey Mouse if you want to, as long as that works for you, right? You don't have to do any of that stuff or believe any of that stuff. You know what I mean? You can be a hardcore skeptic and sort of do that and see if it works, and very often it will work. But the name chaos magic comes from the idea, and this is again from Austin Spare, that they are using the primordial force of the universe, the chaotic force of like before the Big Bang or something, that to use that as the ether in which the magic comes alive. So they're working with the chaotic forces,
Well,
not
this
causing chaos, but working with it.
Well, this sounds far more practical to me and appealing, which is not to take away from the other forms of magic. I love the aesthetic of. I find myself in occult bookshops all the time. I am a curious person, and I'm curious about a lot of things. The idea of chaos magic kind of being this more practical version of manifesting ideas is appealing to me and very 21st century.
Well, they're techniques that can be repeated. I mean, I think that's the thing that's interesting. These books of ancient magic they were recipes that were meant for the tools of the time of the Middle Ages. You know what I mean, or the Renaissance. And then it gets updated, and that's what this is. But it leaves behind all of the things of the past in favor of just what works. It's very simplified. It gets compared to punk rock. It's like the three chord thing. It's not the pomp of Emerson, Lake and Palmer. It's the Sex Pistols.
And by the way, I like both. I know that's weird, but I did. Another thing that you talk about in this is witch talk, and I hadn't heard that name yet. I thought it was quite interesting. Describe when you were looking for talent. You were looking for the people to be in your series. You said you first looked into witch talk, which is, I guess, the witches of TikTok. And I put some stuff on TikTok earlier this year just because I finally felt like, God, I need to do this. And but I have not been very active on it. But tell me about witch talk.
Well, it's a hashtag.
Yep.
and it's one of the most popular hashtags apparently on TikTok. I did not find it particularly enlightening. I found it a
Hmm.
bit disappointing, and I'll tell you why. I was searching for talent. I'm looking for people who stood out, who were good on camera, who were charismatic, that I could, bring into this project and invite into this project. And I didn't see a lot of that on TikTok. There's what you do see, or sorry, on Witch Talk, but what you do see on Witch Talk is a lot of, it's impersonal. It's like, here's my altar,
Right.
and then here's a saying of, some kind of, platitudes that was said by some new age person. There's a quote over it, or it's somebody where you see like burning sage, and there's a quote over it, or they shoot a picture of their cat, but they don't show their faces in these videos. They're very impersonal in that way. I don't know what's so interesting about it, or why that's so popular, but it is. I only found that there were about 4 or 5 personalities that were on TikTok who I could have invited to be interviewed without insulting the rest of the interviewees. You know what I
Agreed.
mean? Would have
Yes.
been disrespectful. What is this person doing there? Why? They would have just stuck out as being not right for it. But I did invite 4 people, and not one of them responded to me. So there you go.
Well, when you're describing that, what it makes me think of is like because of the short format of TikTok, and you're talking about you've got all this B-roll of altars, et cetera, and then some clever sayings. Well, yeah, you're trying to make something in a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, or whatever with some cool visuals. Because people have encouraged me, oh, Michael, you know about all this weird stuff. You should go on TikTok. And I was like, well, every time I've been on TikTok, first of all, a lot of it was complete bullshit. So that was
Yeah,
a bit of a turnoff. And I
yeah.
understood, like, look, this is for people that are look, I'm an old guy, and I understand that a lot of this is being packaged for very young people. So I could just say anything, which I'm not going to do because I have principles. And it's like I'm not going to tell you something wild and crazy for some clicks. But at the same time, it makes me think of youth and our daughters, our teenage daughters. One of them's in her 20s now, one's 19. But at one point, they went through the phase where they've got the altars in their room. And
Hmm.
you know what? We didn't say anything because I've been there. It's like when I started looking into all of this as a young person, I went through it. I took away what I found valuable and I moved on. And I can understand the appeal of much of the symbology and these ideas to young people because they're trying to just figure out the world, right? I think they're trying to gain knowledge. What can I do? This is interesting. So to me, I could see Witch Talk having its place for young people who are getting their feet wet in it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe it's valuable for that, but as an adult, it's a little bit less entertaining. I mean, my wife went through like a 3 month period where she was completely fascinated by TikTok,
Mhm.
and now she just thinks it's garbage and she doesn't go near it. I mean, I look at TikTok as like Wall-E's Planet. You know what I mean? It's just that you've got this robot. I mean, it's all trash, and there's
Yes.
just so much of it, and nothing stands out. And then you've got, pretty soon people will be able to do Pixar level animations in their TikTok. So which one of them is going to stand out?
Right. Of the 50 some odd people that you talk to that are practicing witches or occultists, was there a predominant form that you found more than any other, or was it just all different types evenly?
I think chaos magic is unavoidably a part of everybody's practice to a certain degree, because if most people want results,
Sure.
not all, and some people are more in it for. I'm thinking of one person in particular, for as a communal thing, to work communally for the the good of
Hmm.
the society, or something like that, is a way of coming together. It was all over the place, but like I say, chaos magic. But some of the people who I would say that about are also animist. There's a certain form of Caribbean magic in the Obeah. There's 2 women who are young women who live in London, and they are Obeah practitioners. So, and that is a Caribbean magic that has to be passed down personally from one person to the next. But I think that they also practice chaos magic as well.
Part of the reason I wanted to have you on the show, like I say, I like your work, but I'm a free speech guy. I'm a freedom of religion guy. And one of the things that interests me, believe it or not, I consider myself a Christian, but people say, Parker, you're not a Christian. You're into all of these weird things. And it's like my approach to all of this is I want to know as much as I can about many different things. I want to know, I want to learn, I want to take the things that are valuable. And so I think sometimes people who are of one particular faith negate these other things because they're either scared of it or they've been told to various things about it. And I think that cuts both ways. So a show like yours, I think, or a documentary series like yours, I think is a good thing in that it gives people a gateway into understanding, okay, this is what's really going on. This is what people who are practicing in a day-to-day situation, this is what they do it for. And look, they're regular people. They don't have a broom that they're flying through the sky with.
Yeah, if you look at anything that you're going to see on like A&E or History Channel or that kind of stuff, you're going to see that kind of thing because what they want to get is, okay, we need a bunch of witches in the backyard with a fire burning. You know what I mean? Like that's what they ask.
Preferably scantily clad.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or they want that. They want because they need something visual.
Yes.
And magic, by and large, is an internal thing. It's an internal process. You know what I mean? It's just like I was saying before. It's a mental martial art. It's self-development. It's willpower. But how do you express that on screen? So that's why we see candles and a page of a burning book, and it goes in all of those shows. There's always the same B-roll because what do they use?
And I think they're looking for certain symbols that they already recognize, which is another interesting thing about all of this. Because one of the people on your show was talking about, oh God, I've watched so much recently, if it's not in yours, but is the connection to Jung, Carl Jung, because I think that there are certain symbols, like he said, that go back through many different people for hundreds of thousands of years that appear over and over. And I think sometimes people do magic without even knowing that they're doing magic because they are looking at particular symbols or utilizing particular symbols without even realizing it.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, sigil magic and coming up with a corporate logo are basically the same thing. And as Doug Rushkoff says in Magic Show, they're charging it not with like sex magic, but with marketing dollars. And it's the same thing. I mean, it's funny. There's the business book. What is it? Good to Great, right? But I remember when I was reading that, and I was back in the disinformation days, right? And one of the things that it said was have a good logo, like how important the logo was, because in the way that it represents the totality of what you do, right? And I had that devil head logo at the time, you know what I mean? And I thought, oh, that really, that hits the mark. But it talks about those kind of things. That is a magical thing. I mean, someone in magic who also is like, let's say in there, has a marketing job in Madison Avenue, does advertising, they would approach that consciously as I need to change someone's mind. You know what I mean? With the advertising that I'm doing, or to create something in their mind, create an association in their mind, and that would bring me back to something like, I always use this example, but Ericksonian hypnosis, in the sense that, if you're going to be hypnotized in that way, the first thing he's going to say is, can you smell the flowers in the meadow? And, and you start to try to experience that. And that's how they sort of lull you into that state. But you're convincing yourself of something.
One of the very first bands that I was ever in was also one of the most popular bands I was ever in. And the singer said, hey, man, we need a symbol. Now, everybody knows you need a logo, right? But I was like, a symbol. And he was reading Jung at the time. And we were a post-punk band in Dallas. And we created a symbol. And it was the null set. It was the zero with the slash through it. And at the time, it just blew my mind. I'm like, wow, that's genius. Why have I never thought of that? And what would happen? He's like, Michael, he goes, we need something when people are walking down the street, if they can't read the name, they could see that and know that it's our band. And it makes me also think about, that horrible song that comes on the radio so many times that they finally beat you into submission by repetition to the point that you finally like it because they finally just trained you to like it because you've heard it so many times.
Yeah, you have to see or hear something 8 times before it registers with you, and then you know it. So they have to bombard you in that way.
So marketing is magic.
I think anything is magic, but marketing is a particularly good example that you can say, like, okay, we're not talking about where it intersects or the crossover. No, it is the same thing. It's persuasion. Oh, I know what I was going to say earlier with the Ericksonian hypnosis. I was reading about that, one night, and there was a commercial on for Cinnabon, and they was like, oh, can you smell that cinnamony goodness? And can you smell the flowers in the meadow? And I remember going into Penn Station the next morning and smelling like Cinnabon, and then just like having this urge, I've got to go. I would never eat a Cinnabon under normal
Right.
circumstances, but the night before, that idea had been implanted in my brain, and I happily went over and ate a greasy Cinnabon, for breakfast. So, but that's how it works. I mean, like I said, they're indistinguishable in my mind. It's about persuasion or propaganda, and
Mhm.
that's how, like I say, this kind of information war is being waged.
Well,
And
let's go.
and they're neutral, and they can be used for good or bad.
Sure. Let's go down that, because this is not new. I mean, from time immemorial, if I go into war, if I go into battle with somebody, or I need something, what did I do? I went to the witch doctor or the magus or the witch or whomever, asking for their blessing or their some type of influence to help me in that battle or that endeavor that I was about to embark upon. So I think that the idea, and I was also wondering, I was like, do you think that there's any group of people in history that did not have a magical component to their existence? I I don't know, but I think it's probably unlikely.
I think it's probably unlikely. I would agree with that. I think that it's a magical view of the universe would be how a primitive man would come into an understanding of the cosmos, because they would have nothing to base it on, really. I mean, if you think about how late in human history a telescope appears, or that people could map out the stars, or even notice that they were in some kind of constellations, from our vantage point. So I think it's just, yeah, I think that's right.
You were also, I know you're in the show, you're going to cover kind of the political aspects of magic. And did you ever see the film The Men Who Stare at Goats?
No, but I know what you're referring to.
A lot of times when I try to, people, they'll say, Parker, you're just a crazy conspiracy theorist. I'm like, no, listen, I'm sorry. Money was spent on these projects, and I actually don't think it was that crazy. They may not have ultimately had great effectiveness, but I understand why they did it. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but things like Project Stargate, remote viewing, I'm very interested in the consciousness aspect of all of this. I don't care what walk of faith you're coming from. At the end of the day, I think that these are expressions of respecting and trying to utilize consciousness.
I'm very big into reading about PSI
Hmm.
studies and stuff like that. I mean, the way that science brushes that aside when there's so much evidence that's been marshaled to say, if it's happening a little bit, how can we make it happen more? That's the way
Hmm.
that they should be looking at it, instead of trying, well, it's just noise. And it's like, no, it's statistically significant. I mean, I think that they've proven the existence of various sort of psi things, but not conclusively, to
Hmm.
satisfy a lot of people. But I think that's going to change.
Well, I also think that the old saying about astrology, millionaires don't use astrology, billionaires do. And I think that came from JP Morgan. But the idea that I'm trying to express is that I think that this knowledge of esoteric content, they've long not want us to have access to it. We're going to use it, but it's all bullshit. So don't worry about it. You don't use it, but those who know, and they don't want that necessarily out in the public, which brings us to now the internet age. So it could be anything from a little girl on Witch Talk doing whatever she's doing, or conversations, hopefully as enlightening as the one that we're having right now. So I think that now this is open to people to consider. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. I mean, in the past, you had to seek out some sort of spiritual group. You know what I mean? Whether that's the Golden Dawn or the OTO or whatever that organization is, or Wicca, and be taught it by other people, because you didn't have access to something like that. I mean, like, how many, before the internet, how many cities had witchcraft stores?
Mhm.
Not many. There weren't then, and there are fewer of them now, I'm sure.
I believe that this type of esoteric knowledge has always existed, and it's
Hmm.
been kind of hoarded so that we don't get to it, although the practitioners of it have always existed. But now we know they exist because of the internet. So everybody's got a platform now, for better or worse. Some of it we take seriously, some of it not. But at the end of the day, projects like yours, I think, are a really good thing. And I think people are going to learn a lot about it. How do people contribute to making this happen sooner than later?
It's at Kickstarter. If you go to magicshow.net, it'll take you right to the Kickstarter page.
It seems to me like it's blowing up pretty fast, because the other day when Lisa called me, and once again, I want to give a shout out to Lisa Derrick for making me aware of this, introducing me to you.
She's great.
The Kickstarter was over here, and just today, I mean, it had increased nicely.
Yeah,
so you're making progress.
Yeah, we're doing pretty well. We're on track. Let's say I'm happy with the way it's been going so far, and we're getting starting to get more attention, some more press out of it. There's an article that'll be in the Sunday Times of London. They've already talked to Grant Morrison about it, so that's coming out, and that should increase the awareness of it, and the legitimacy of it as well. But it's you just have to keep going at it and just find different new pockets of people on a daily basis that have never heard of it or any of this stuff who might be interested, but it has to reach them. And that's the day-to-day effort the day-to-day work that I have to wage just to get that information out there.
Well, I hope that this helps you. And I don't want to jump ahead too much. I know that you're going to have your first showing of this, I believe, on Halloween for subscribers, contributors.
Mm-hmm. It's so close to be, it's like TV. I have to finish it, but I have all of the raw material. I've got all of the music. The music, incidentally, for this is fantastic, and it comes from a great underground record label in London called Library of the Occult.
I follow them on Instagram.
It's okay. So you know what they are.
100%.
So Tom McDowell, the guy that runs the label, he's also one of the artists. He's got a brilliant thing going there, and it's such an amazing. It's library music, as you would think of library music, like go and you can use it, royalty free. That used to be a thing that you would get a record that you could use on television. The Monty Python theme comes from one of those, incidentally.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it did. So it's like that,
Well, I love the whole idea. I love the aesthetic. I'm very happy that I finally met you. I've been watching your work from afar and been aware of you for a long time, and I'm glad to finally meet you face to face.
Yeah, it's been terrific. I've had fun doing this.
Well, I wish you continued luck. Ladies and gentlemen, it is Magick Show. I'm going to put links in the bio. You can find it. It's Magick Show, and it's a masterclass in modern occultism, a sprawling documentary project by occultists for occultists. Richard Metzger, thank you, brother.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you like what we're doing here, if you find value in this, I would love if you would make a little magic right now by punching that like button, punching the subscription button. Give me some stars on Apple or whatever your podcast platform or video platform that you're on. That would help me manifest more of this. And I think we're on late 40s amount of episodes. And I think at 50, I will try to start monetizing this thing. But in the meantime, if you could help a brother out by giving me a like, I would sure appreciate it. I appreciate you. Until next time, keep your heart and your mind open. Peace.